The night wind cut across the Yellowstone, hissing through cottonwoods on the bank. A low fire burned under a kettle, tamped with dirt to hide its glow. Children slept under buffalo robes on travois. Ponies stood hip-shot, breath lifting in pale clouds. Scouts came in from the dark. Soldiers, 2 days behind, maybe less, one said, pointing southeast. In the glow, the man everyone watched lifted his chin. Sitting Bull said little. Then, through an interpreter, in words plain for every ear, "Move before dawn, north to the Milk River, then beyond the line the old people called the grandmother's land. If the army pushed them to a reservation, they would take their families where blue coats could not follow without permission. They had been moving for months. Since the summer fight on the greasy grass, columns came from all sides. After the snow camp on the tongue and running fights in the breaks, after soldiers burned teepees and drove off pony herds, the Hunkpapa and their allies could not stand and fight. Some bands turned in for rations, others held the open country by speed. In winter and spring 1877, Nelson Miles pressed up the Yellowstone, trying to trap the last free camps against the Canadian line. Mothers wrapped infants and tied them to cradle boards. Meat was nearly gone. They boiled hides when they had to. They started before the sky changed, the trail stringing across the flats in a steady drift. Women took down poles and wound rawhide ropes. Boys drove the pony herd at a long trot along the ridge to keep dust off the children. Men leaned into harness, shoulders taking travois weight. Far behind, the army found cold ash where cooking stones had been scattered so no one else could use them. They crossed the Little Muddy and reached the milk as ice broke into plates and swung past in slow, bumping sheets. They ferried people and bundles on lashed poles. The river was black and heavy. Men kept travois from rolling as ponies waded through. They moved along the north bank toward a line no one had drawn in the dirt, but everyone knew by trade and rumor, the place where Queen Victoria's law held. They crossed in May. There was no gate, only sky and wind and a sense the ground was different. Here, buffalo still moved in long brown rivers. Traders spoke French and Cree. The Hunkpapa set camp near Wood Mountain, on high ground where the breeze thinned mosquitoes. The Northwest Mounted Police rode in with carbines upright. Their commander, James Morrow Walsh, introduced himself with a firm hand. He would keep the peace, refuse American demands to arrest them, and Canada would give no rations. They would live by the hunt. At first, it worked. Herds were thick that summer. From dawn to dusk, hunters pushed buffalo. Fat sizzled with wild onions. Children stopped waking from hunger. News from the South came fast. Crazy Horse surrendered and died at Fort Robinson. Gall turned in at Standing Rock. Agency beef lines were short and flour-wormy. Riders from those agencies crept north to see kin and wept to smell meat roasting and hear women laugh without a soldier watching. Walsh visited often. He liked Sitting Bull's frankness. The chief liked Walsh's habit of saying yes or no with his eyes on you. They smoked under a robe stretched between poles. Walsh said Washington wanted him back and offered terms. Sitting Bull said the government promised peace and brought war. He would not hand his people to men who broke their word. He asked not for gifts, only space and time. Winter tested that stance. Buffalo thinned to shadows, then to tracks that ended in empty horizon. Hunters rode farther and came back with less. Women sang as they scraped hides, quiet when they measured what little pemmican was left. With the first heavy snow, camp broke into smaller circles to save wood. Stories got short and exact, where herds used to winter, which Cooley held a cache laid down in better years. By spring 1878, complaints reached the Mounties. Métis and ranchers said Lakota were taking cattle and too much wood. Walsh came with interpreters and a hard edge. If they wished to stay, he said, they must pay for timber and keep off stock. Sitting Bull agreed to the law and asked again for rations. Walsh's answer did not change. The Queen's law would protect their lives, but not feed them. Many families could not bear it. They drifted south in small parties, escorted to the line by Mounties, then picked up by American scouts and taken to beef lines, where a ticket graded their future. Year by year, Wood Mountain shrank. In 1879 and 1880, more went back under flags of truce. Gall crossed with his band, choosing certain hunger with a ration ticket over uncertain meat with pride. Those who stayed hunted antelope, trapped, traded for ammunition and needles, gathered choke cherries for drying. Mothers counted ribs through shirts and pretended not to see. A young man who had fought on the greasy grass walked 10 steps from his lodge, sat down, and did not rise again. Ottawa transferred Walsh in 1880. With him went the one Canadian who could call Sitting Bull friend and be believed. His replacement kept the law, but did not sit on blankets. American agents sent word that those who returned would be disarmed and treated fairly. Some were, some not. Rations came late. Soldiers frowned at old enemies. Still, children's ribs settled the argument for many. Bands that had shared a cook fire since the Powder River moved at night to avoid quarrels with the few who remained. By summer 1881, the line between staying and returning wore through. Buffalo were near gone on both sides. The camp counted 400-odd souls, a scrape compared to the nation that once blackened valleys with lodges. Sitting Bull called the leaders and spoke without ceremony. He had led them north when the soldiers' law closed like a hand. The land held them. It would not hold them now. Children could not eat defiance. He would go south and talk. If the army lied, the blame would rest on him. If they kept faith, the old and the small might live the winter. They broke camp and moved in a long, slow file to the line and over it to the Missouri country. Along Poplar River they met scouts from Fort Buford, who rode with them the last miles. At the post on the Missouri's bank, July heat stood like glass over the parade ground. Sitting Bull wore a dark coat that itched and a face that did not show it. He placed his rifle in the officer's hands and asked that his people be fed. The officer wrote while a sergeant counted heads, touching each child's hair. That night, soldiers issued beef on the hoof and sacks of flour. Women roasted thick cuts and let fat drip straight to children's tongues. Sitting Bull did not go free. The army sent him under guard downriver to Fort Randall, where he would be held 2 years before rejoining his people at Standing Rock. But the march north ended where it had to, with a choice made in daylight and recorded in a hand that could be judged later. The trail from the Yellowstone to Wood Mountain and back was hard to find after a season. Grass closed over sleeping places. River ice healed. The old people remembered how that line underfoot felt, how a different flag did not demand surrender on sight, how for a time they lived by their own hands and no one's ticket. Walk the swell at Wood Mountain today, and you can still see where tents later stood, where teepees once turned with the wind. Willows in the draws are thicker than they were in 1877 because no one needs to cut them to boil a kettle. The old Mountie Post is a small museum with glass over the desk where Walsh first wrote Lakota names. In high summer, the grass runs in soft waves, same as when tired ponies and a nation on foot crossed open country and asked to be left alone long enough to raise their children to the next winter. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.